excited to have Richard Rogers coming to deliver this lecture. Richard is Professor of New Media and Digital Culture at the University of Amsterdam. I imagine that most people here are really very, very familiar with his work, and his work, for example, in co-developing and developing Issue Crawler, a digital humanities or a digital social science method, his work to direct the Netherlands Research School for Media Studies. He's written a load of books which you should read, and intervenes in areas that, if you like, expand the whole notion of what digital humanities is or could be, intersect with them, and perhaps critically engage with them in ways that might challenge some of the assumptions about the relationship between theory, method, and critical practice, and also think hard about what, if you like, what new methods are for. And the title of his lecture today is Otherwise Engaged, Social Media, from Vanity Metrics to Critical Analytics. So, warm welcome, Richard.
Thank you. What I'm going to do today is present an alternative metrics project for social media, ultimately. An alternative metrics project for social media. But in order to get there, there are a number of moves in the overall argument. So first I'm going to present a critique of social media, and that is a critique about basically the assumptions as to its value. And the assumptions as to its value revolve around the idea that people are presenting themselves online and are part of a social network. What then subsequently happens is a number of metrics are devised to measure people's presentation of self and their networking. And these metrics have been called vanity metrics. And I'm going to discuss what these vanity metrics are and imply. And what I'm going to do is subsequently, in the next move, propose to shift our understanding of social media, and in particular shift the understanding of it as predominantly a social network for social networking and counting to something kind of different, and talk a little bit about the shift in how people are increasingly studying social media, moving away from the study of social media as principally a presentation of self to the study of social causes, and actually doing issue work. So I'm going to propose that we no longer treat social media only as a social network, but instead also as an issue network. And then I would like to develop a series of alternative metrics, moving away from the idea of measuring presentation of self and self-performance online to measuring something else. And these metrics I call critical analytics. So this is ultimately a project about seeing social media differently. So what I want to do is kick off by arguing that the dominant mode of engagement currently for social media is distraction. And I know that sounds oxymoronic. However, there have been a number of terms that have been developed over the years, over the past decade or so, and I'm highlighting just a few of them that capture this sort of distracted node that we're in. And I've chosen three kind of different types. The first one captures our kind of private cognitive state. The second one captures sort of our interpersonal relations, and the third one captures our work relations. And I want to go through them very, very briefly. So the first one is a notion developed by the American cultural critic Nicholas Carr called flickering man. And I'm just going to quote very, very briefly from him defining it. He writes, "Contemplative man, the fellow who came to understand the world sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, is a goner. He's been succeeded by flickering man, who darts from link to link, conjuring the world out of continually refreshed arrays of pixels." So this is arguably a sort of the cognitive state the dominant cognitive state that we're in. Now, this particular term was developed largely for the web and for Google. You hear the word link in there, but it has remained. The second one, ambient awareness. Now this is something that comes from human-computer interaction, but it was used critically by Clive Thompson in the New York Times, and he defined ambient awareness as always seeking to be aware of others' status. So being interested in constant status updates. And it fits into Ito's notion of remote intimacy. So you're sending messages. Now this is largely smartphone related, so that you can remain intimate interpersonally with others at a remote distance. So this is an interpersonal relation. The third one was coined by Linda Stone, and she calls it continuous partial attention. And this is sort of more kind of work-related. And so she defines it as neither synchronous nor asynchronous communication, but rather that we're constantly in semi-sync mode, that we feel as if we're in a constant state of crisis, that we need to be updated in a sort of work environment. Now this distracted mode of engagement thus covers at least three of the private cognitive, the interpersonal, as well as work-related, and is thus rather all-encompassing. Now, the solutions that people have put forward to deal with our distracted mode of engagement, what I would like to talk about is on the level of the interface. So on the level of the interface, there's a movement afoot, and it was started by Wiesner and John Seeley Brown a couple of decades ago, and has been furthered by Amber Case and others, and it's called encalming or calm technology. So the idea is that to create practices, to create interfaces that encalm, and the idea they introduce the need for calming the interface as follows. We currently are experiencing the enemies of calm: dialog boxes, pop-ups, push notifications, alarms. And so, and in order to somehow mitigate this constant distraction, what encalming technology movement calls for is that which informs us but does not demand our focus or attention. That is informing without distracting. Now, you'll notice, I mean, if you're on an Apple OS X, the notifications that slide in upper right, I mean, this is part of this encalming technology, and having increased access to notification settings as well as how they are delivered. More radically is the project by Benjamin Grosser, the Facebook demetricator, which actually removes all these numerical, all the badges, all the number badges on the interface, so as to not distract you, and also move you to actually do this interface work, do this work for the platform, this platform labor. So what I want to talk about is another project, and this is a critique of what we currently think of as the value of social media. And I think that the value of social media, as at least assumed by many of us, but also in the industry that then derives metrics to measure our engagement, is that they see social media as having value in a few senses. The first one is that we are constantly using it to present ourselves, and then more specifically to boast about ourselves, to put ourselves in a particular light. And this Lisa Wortham has called the success theater. So we are showing how successful we are, or playing to this in social media. The second one is the idea that the networking that we do should be productive. And there was a debate that Dana Boyd initiated a number of years ago of whether or not we should call them social network sites or social networking sites. And she preferred social network sites over social networking, so as to not always think of what you're doing online with your friends and acquaintances and others as necessarily having to be productive, having to network for the purposes of some sort of form, some kind of productive relationship, to try to create some kind of value out of your networking. The third one is this idea of consumer futurism. And now this is a term that's been used by William Gibson and others. It's sort of kind of pop term. It's the idea that in social media that is the site of the cool, and you need social media community managers to identify the cool. And also identify those brokers who could potentially be valuable to spread the gospel about the cool. And that social media is ultimately this place where one can seed consumption for in future. So the idea of social media as being productive as a site for consumer futurism. And there are sort of network metrics that go along with this. So if you are highly between, then you're considered to be particularly valuable as a broker in order to spread your particular things that you find cool. So this is where metrics now come in. So if you assume that social media is primarily for the presentation of self, for productive networking, and for consumer futurism, then you'll understand why vanity metrics are developed. Now, vanity metrics, it's a kind of generic term. I mean, initially when it was used to critique clout and cred, but it's a more general term that refers to counting and one being concerned about one's count, so trying to improve one's count, and then showing that count to others. So what is it that you are trying to achieve if you are in the business of vanity metrics? What is it that you are measuring? So in some sense there are three, and I put them up here. So celebrity or micro-celebrity is the first. Now, celebrity was, I think, most famously defined by Daniel Boorstin, the former Librarian of Congress, as being well known for being well known. So this idea of seeing a particular count. So this person has 2,000 followers. This person has 10,000 followers. So he must be, or she must be well known. So this idea of well known or celebrity as being both measurable and desirable. The second one, and this is literally where this notion of clout comes from. So clout with a K as a sort of as a metric, clout with a C is this idea of influence. Now, in social media and social media metrics and measurements, one often hears the notion of the influencer or influencers. So who are these people? These are, as I mentioned just a minute ago, these people are those who are brokers, or most in between, in a sense that they can be used strategically. So those with not only with a high follower count or a lot of friends, but those with the right followers and the right kinds of friends. And then the third one is this idea of the trend, and the things trend online, and that one wants to capture that which is trending. And so trending in this particular sense is something quite specific. It's sort of it's rising novelty, but it's relative. So it's relative novelty that then is in some sense the definition of what is kind of cool online. So that which is new and which is rising relatively. It's not completely novel, but fairly so. And so this is what one wants to do online. One wants to seek to find the cool and the cool people as well as the cool things. And so this is where this notion of cool hunting comes in. So what I'd like to do is try to think about social media in a different way and try to consider social media as not necessarily only about the study of the self or the study of the presentation of self, but rather think about how social media could be studied in terms of the mobilization or the productivity of social causes and social issues. And so in order to do that, I'm going to make two arguments. The first one is that I would like to demonstrate that in the study of social media that this is already taking place, that there is already a significant shift from the study of the self in social media to the study of the cause in social media. And this is occurring across a number of platforms, and I'll mention three. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And then secondly, what I would like to argue is that one can also shift the attention in the study of social media from the presentation of self and the social network to a different kind of network in social media, which is locatable and analyzable, and where different analytics can be derived. So first, I want to talk about three platforms and how they've developed over time, and specifically how their study has developed over time. And so the first one is Twitter. Now, Twitter was initially conceived as this tool for what Jack Dorsey considered was ambient friend following. So what you would do on Twitter was largely follow your friends, and the Twitter prompt, the original one, was "What are you doing?" So this idea of this is in fact the original sketch that Dorsey made for Twitter. It was originally to be called status.us, so a sort of hack domain name, which was cool at the time. And you can see that this is largely thought of in terms of a application for kind of urban San Franciscans, young ones, whose two default statuses are either in bed or going to park. So this is the early Twitter, where it was largely thought of as a medium, largely for phatic communication as opposed to substantive. And it was also thought of as a kind of what I had for lunch medium, right, with banal tweeting. Now, something happened around 2009, a couple of things. So one was the shift in what you were prompted to answer in Twitter. So it moved from what are you doing to what's happening. This was also the moment where Twitter started being caught up in a number of major world events, where Twitter went almost overnight from being a what I had for lunch medium to a revolutionary medium. And this particular idea of Twitter as something substantive, something where one could measure what is going on the street, so sort of remote event analysis, and begin to think of it as a site for the monitoring of events, is something that is still used today. The other thing that has happened to Twitter, of course, is that it has commodified, having gone to the stock exchange, selling now its data. I mean, it actually gets quite a bit of its revenue from data, and arguably has become a sort of generic data set for the study of virtually anything. Initially from sort of celebrity awards and stocks and elections to so much more. But nevertheless, there has been a noticeable shift in Twitter from merely the study of the presentation of self or ambient friend following or the social network to the study of issues and movements. I think something similar has happened in Facebook. And it's happened in Facebook for a different reason. But I think Facebook, most Facebook studies up until about 2011, 2012, when Facebook changed its API to version 2.0, most Facebook studies revolved around tastes and ties. So it was the study of the profile and the study of the friends network, and then the relationships between them, and something quite significant happened around 2008, 2009, and that is when this particular study came out, which was in fact entitled Tastes and Ties, where researchers from Harvard had anonymized the data of the Facebook users that they were studying. They were studying quite typical social network questions. So does one's network determine, in some sense, the similarity of their tastes, and also over time? And what colleagues of ours did at the University of Milwaukee, University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, is they were able to de-anonymize the data, and they found out that in fact this was the Harvard College graduating class of 2008 that was being studied. And not only did Facebook researchers and social network researchers, but also Facebook itself had a problem. And I would argue that this was probably the seminal event that gave rise to a lot of the questions of the ethics of social media research, but also prompted Facebook to close off its API for the study of friends and profiles and interests, and now we can only study pages. And pages tend to be of public figures or of events or other things of that nature. But also around that time was this page, We're All Khaled Saeed, which is probably one of the most famous Facebook pages, where there's been quite a lot of work done on this, studying mobilization, studying engagement using pages. One also does increasingly multiple page analysis. So this is an image here of interliked pages. So pages on Facebook can like other pages. So network analysis goes on, but between pages as opposed to between individuals. And then what one notices when studying engagement, and this is the network of right-wing populists and extremists in Europe, and what one notices when studying these sorts of pages is that the content that tends to be most engaged with is mimetic. And so this particular is meme-like, and memes not in the Dawkins sense, but more in the Lemore-Schiffman sense of people, or in the Henry Jenkins sense of spreadable media, of people creating content with knowledge of other content so as to add to it, so as to add to the narrative. I think Instagram is trickier. I think it is in part going down the same road. Instagram, as you probably know, started as something that was thought of as being a part of kind of teen culture, selfie culture. There have been a number of projects. So this is the first Instagram photo. This is Kevin Systrom's girlfriend and dog. So it's kind of not quite a selfie, sort of family selfie or something like this. And for a few years was studied almost exclusively in terms of its in terms of selfie culture. So this is the famous project by Lev Manovich, Selfie City, where there's 4 cities in the world, 3,200 Instagram images with the hashtag selfie in Rio, Moscow, Berlin, I forget the other 4th one. Where one then studied the formal properties of the selfies and did a sort of a kind of sentiment analysis about the sort of moods of these cities on the basis of the selfies and the formal qualities thereof. I think we're now moving into a time when Instagram is beginning to be studied as well for social causes, and so and in particular you see terms like arising like hashtag publics or antagonistic hashtag publics. And so this is one example. So Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, and the extent to which one can see mobilizations thereof on Instagram. One also studies filter activism, and you can also geolocate engagement. Okay, so if you agree that indeed we are increasingly seeing a shift in the study of social media from merely the only the presentation of self to that of social issues and causes, then the next step in the argument is well, how do we then develop new metrics? And what I would like to put forward is that we sort of shift the network under study, so that we move away from studying. I mean, we can still do that, but we move away from studying, for the purpose of this alternative analytics project, we move away from the study of the social network to the issue network. And the issue network is something that requires techniques this is I mean, most of the social network analysis to date has relied on big data. And also sort of studying it all. So when you study it all, you get into you get Justin Bieber as being like the most significant actor in a particular space. So it requires different sorts of techniques. So a technique to find a particular portion of the network that is authoritative or expert or otherwise engaged. And this is the sort of title of the talk that I'm using. So if we move networks from the social to the issue, then I would like to propose that we also develop new metrics. And these metrics I'm calling critical analytics. There are a couple of projects that are analogous, and I'll mention them now. So well, there's one in particular. So recently, Dean Freeland, together with David Karp and a few others at American University, Georgetown University, are beginning to develop what they call movement metrics. So they used Charles Tilley's notion of what moves a movement, and there are 4 different concerns. So one is worthiness, one is unity, one is numbers, and one is cohesion, I think. Yeah. Oh, no, commitment. worthiness, unity, numbers, and commitment. And then operationalize these particular things for these particular notions to do Twitter analysis on the Black Lives Matter movement. So this particular project that I'm presenting is not completely isolated, but rather is part of new thinking about how to create alternative metrics in social media. And there are a couple of other pieces of work along these lines as well. So what I would like to propose are 5. Now, these particular metrics don't come from sort of social movement studies. Rather, they come from issue network analysis. So they have a different provenance. This is work that I've done with Nortje Mares and others, published in a MIT volume 2004 called Information Politics on the Web, and in other places. It's also quite Latourian in nature. Nevertheless, I'll go through each of these individually. And so the proposal here is to devise 5 metrics at least, or these are examples. One's dominant voice, the second is concern, the third is commitment, the fourth is positioning, and the fifth is alignment. And these are the proposed alternative engagement metrics for the study of the engagement in causes in issue networks in social media. So, what's dominant voice? So this is I think quite familiar to many. It's quite Foucauldian in nature. It has to do with who speaks and who is made silent. And I just want to give you an example. This is this is an authoritative space. This is not social media, but this is U.S. newspapers in 2008 to 2010. And this is the subject matter is HIV vaccines. And these are the sections of the newspaper where this issue was discussed the most, HIV vaccine. So you see business and then you see health in a very, very small. So you can see that in this particular example, the business or the business section of the newspaper is the dominant voice surrounding this particular issue. The second is the notion of concern. This is a notion that I'm developing through Bruno Latour and his idea that concern is the redirection of attention by publics. So it's something that is not necessarily static, and it is then triggered by an event. So if there is an event or an issue, or in Latourian terms, a matter of concern, then which publics redirect their attention to it and which do not. And the example I want to give here is from Fukushima. And this is some work we did. And we looked at about a week after the event, a week to 2 weeks after the event, NGO attention to this particular issue. And in particular, we compared environmental NGOs with species NGOs. And what we found was that the environmental NGOs paid a lot of attention immediately to the issue, whereas the species NGOs did not. So I'm referring particularly to WWF. And now WWF, we followed this up, some 16 months later, did begin to pay quite a lot of attention to this and started campaigning on it. But their attention was not redirected to this issue. They did not make it immediately into a matter of concern. The third one is commitment. So this is the one that's shared with the Tilly and Freelon work. And commitment here is defined as the longevity of concern or the persistence of concern. And here I'm using Suleiman's distinction between a citizen and a consumer. And so the idea that if one is consuming issues, so to speak, one can bounce from issue space to issue space, for example, for the purposes of press attention or for the purposes of attracting donor funding, or one can abide in a particular space. And the example here is some work that I did with Greenpeace International. They're based in Amsterdam. And what I did was, with some colleagues, we looked at the extent to which Greenpeace, which one might consider to be media attention hungry. So one might consider to be Greenpeace someone who's an organization that tries to make media splashes continually. And the critical question is, well, do they exhibit commitment to issues? And so what we did was we looked at their website and for what they were campaigning for. So their main campaigns over the period of 16 years using the Wayback Machine of the Internet Archive, and made an accounting of the extent to which they continued to campaign in particular issue spaces or whether they leave those issue spaces. And what we found is that they are actually remarkably consistent in their commitments, campaigning for most of their issues consistently over time, only coming in and out of very, very few issue spaces. The fourth one is positioning as a critical analytic, and this is the purposive deployment of a keyword. So do I use the term blood diamonds, or do I use the term conflict diamonds? And this particular idea of positioning is again Latourian, so it comes initially from Latour and Acrich's work on programs and anti-programs. So forming, deriving a particular, or formulating particular language in order to mobilize a public, and also formulating particular sort of counter language in order to counterposition, or to counterposition. This is, there's also a third type, and this is sort of obvious efforts at being neutral. So there's a third type of positioning there. You oftentimes see this in journalistic contexts. So style guides, New York Times, Guardian. So you know, what are we actually going to call these parties? Are they rebels? Are they freedom fighters? Are they etc.? So they'll come up with a sort of a third position, a kind of neutral term, and so that's also positioning. So here the critical analytic is how one is positioning oneself vis-a-vis in a particular issue space. Now the example that I want to give is this is largely with the work in Instagram and on antagonistic hashtag publics, and specifically the hashtag publics that arose around the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2015 in favor of same-sex marriage, and the use of love wins and things like this by the program versus the use of the antagonistic love loses and Jesus wins by the anti-program. And one can see these sorts of movements, or begin to sort of measure them through looking at on Instagram at filter activism. as well as one can also geolocate this sort of engagement. Okay. The last one is alignment. So alignment is who else is positioning along with you. So it's the company a keyword keeps, and this relies on Walter Lippmann's idea of needing to create means to find signs of where sympathy lies. So to create means to get a coarse sense of partisanship. And so we can create analytics to get a sense of where sympathies lie. And so this question here is, well, who else is joining the program? Who else is joining the anti-program? Who are those who are not joining either, who are exhibiting efforts at neutrality? And the example that I want to give you is, this is from the first debate in the UN Security Council around, so what's it called? The effort at neutrality would be to call it the barrier, but if I wanted to be in the program, I would call it the security fence, and if I wanted to be in the anti-program, I would call it the apartheid wall. So the barrier between Israel and the Palestinian territories, when it was debated in the UN Security Council, various countries used terms, and the terms would show you how they align, and whether or not these particular countries came to terms around particular positions. Here you'll notice that only Germany joins Israel in the program, so to speak, calling it security fence, and no one joins the Palestinians in calling it apartheid wall, although there are similar sympathetic expressions. But most of the alignment is around other terms. For example, separation wall and the wall. So this is again a sort of alignment as a proposed critical analytic for the understanding of the company that one keeps through keyword positioning. Okay, so as I said, these are examples. There are other critical analytics that are possible, but in order to bring them into being in the first place, a number of moves need to be made. And so the idea that I put forward today was that we don't necessarily have to go along with Vanity Metrics as the dominant means by which we study engagement metrically online. Because we don't necessarily have to study social media as primarily being about the presentation of self, or being about productive social networking. So if we then shift our understanding or our assumptions about social media from being a social network to being an issue network, then we can begin to think about an alternative metrics project, an alt metrics, so to speak, for social media. And these can come in a variety of flavors. As I said, there are some that take inspiration from social movements, and there are also some that take inspiration from work on issue networks. And these are the five that I've put forward today. That's it. Thanks.